Greetings. Welcome, my beautiful people. I might be a little bit late, but it's that time. See the background, nature, universe. Out here getting this melanin, eating it up, fighting this pollen. I'm doing pretty good today. Off and on, been a little rough. I think I can hold off and give y'all a good couple of passages today. Rulers of the universe with dominant genes. So I say, gotta give y'all this therapy. Tell that devil move over and make way for my soldiers, cause ain't gonna be no devotion. You wanna kill me, take it's mental therapy. Gotta give it to you. You got to play the best that you got. Cause good Lord, I guarantee myself 100 years of a great life. You wanna I said one thing, we gotta be mentally stable to get anywhere in life. You can have all the luxuries in the world, all the financial benefits in the world. You can have all the money in the world. You have all the fine things. And if your mind ain't right, you're still unhealthy. See, it's one thing to be financially healthy. It's another thing to be mentally healthy. If you're not mentally healthy and don't have the right values, then everything else won't have any right purpose. It won't have the correct purpose. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. You see it, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy. I started over at chapter 1, where I'll be beginning today. I read the foreword and prologue and all that stuff there. It was real good. So now I'm on to the first chapter. Like I said, I started over for those that missed it. Chapter 1. I don't even notice race. This is a quote. Racism, one of the most baneful and persistent evils, is a major barrier to peace. Its practice perpetrates too outrageous a violation of the dignity of human beings to be countenanced under any pretext. Racism retards the unfoldment of the boundless potentialities of its victims, corrupts its perpetrators, and blights human progress. Recognition of the oneness of mankind, implemented by appropriate legal measures, must be universally upheld if this problem is to be overcome. The promise of world peace. The Baha'i Universal House of Justice, 1985. That's where that came from. I arrived in South Africa in 1994 on the heels of President Nelson Mandela's inauguration. As an African American sharing the same black skin as those impacted by apartheid, I set off prepared to face opposition and shunning by disgruntled white South Africans. My preparations resemble how one might respond after a run-in, perhaps a little flare-up of a few harsh words with a co-worker on a Friday afternoon. You know that you're going to see that person the following week, so you mentally plan for Monday with a little internal script. Well, if they come in and they say that, this is what I'm going to say. Get the idea. So I had kind of a chip on my shoulder when I left Portland. Upon arrival in South Africa, I was warmly greeted and enjoyed several uneventful weeks. In other words, I didn't have a single negative encounter. So I started to provoke people. I wasn't about to return home from South Africa without having had a real deep kind of experience to recount. I would approach white South Africans and I'd say, tell me a little bit about that apartheid, huh? What was that like? On numerous occasions, they'd answer, yes, the joint was an awful experience. The oppression of the blacks, the behavior of the whites, glad it's over though. Welcome to the new South Africa. Somewhat puzzled by the responses, I decided to ask some black South Africans. I'd go up to the black South Africans and I'd say, so tell me a little bit about that apartheid. It must have been awful. They'd say, yeah, Joy, it was awful. The oppression of the blacks, the behavior of the whites, Glad it's over though. Welcome to the new South Africa. I was shocked and thought to myself, isn't anybody upset here in South Africa? Even we back in America have our disgruntled folks, you know, like the neo-Nazis in Idaho. It later occurred to me that in the 6 weeks I had spent traveling throughout Southern Africa, I had never felt the level of racial tension that I experienced at home in the United States. I had experienced more tension during my brief time at the Portland airport preparing to leave than I did throughout the entire time I spent in South Africa. I had to ask myself what I was observing in this experience. Why was there so little racial tension in South Africa? A country with fresh, open wounds from apartheid. And why was there so much racial tension in America? A country that supposedly put an end to its great sin of chattel slavery well over 100 years ago, and this version of apartheid years prior to my visit to South Africa. Perhaps South Africans experienced so little tension compared to Americans because officially apartheid had such a short lifespan, about 45 years. Perhaps it is because in the end they voluntarily gave up their unjust system. Perhaps it is because South Africa admitted their crimes to the world, and through the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission established in 1996, 2 years after apartheid was abolished, many whites in South Africa owned up to the crimes they committed against their black countrymen. Maybe it is because South Africa has fought, suffered, and continues to struggle to establish justice and a firm footing while in the plain sight of us all. Hold on. I'll be right back. Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Alberta Williams King, Beatrice Barkley, Nat Turner, James Byrd of Jasper, Texas, Charleston Nye, Sandra Bland, Corinne Gaines, Alfred Sterling, Philando Castile, Eric Garner, Walter Scott, Oscar Grant, Fred Hampton, Jordan Edwards, Mark Clark, Brandon McClellan, Michael McDonald, Freddie Gray, Michael Xavier Johnson, and Kendrick Johnson. I do this for you. I took a journey to the mountaintop. When I got there, I saw a black man. Little baby. Had a head full of nappy hair. Move out the way. He said he wasn't ready for me yet. He had another plan. Made me a black move, baby. Move. I'm back. Whatever the reason, it is clear that America has chosen a very different approach. I believe that racism is our nation's most serious illness, and the ever-present racial tension in America is just one of its manifestations. Racism has run like poison through the blood of American society since Europeans first landed on these shores. And since that beginning, America and Americans have invested much in denying it. Americans' denial of their blatant racism and the attending atrocities committed throughout the nation's history has become pathological. Such denial has allowed this illness to fester for almost 400 years. It is what keeps this country sick with this issue of race. At the root of this sickness is the unchallenged belief that there are physical differences between people that account for the intellectual attributes and abilities of those people. Since before Aristotle's time, people have been using the idea of racial difference to justify the subjugation and enslavement of those different and less powerful than themselves. Such brutality and oppression Such brutality and oppression in the name of racial superiority has occurred so many times over so many years that we, as a nation, can no longer recognize and acknowledge the simple beauty and the diversity of the human family. Today, the concept of race has gotten confused with variation in physical appearance and cultural expression. This confusion has led to our inability to identify simple, natural beauty in its diverse forms, as evidenced by people proudly saying, "I don't know this race." This is particularly unfortunate because we know that race, in the way most people have come to understand it, is as valid a notion as the earth being flat. The myth of race. Here's a little test. What are the races of humanity? Perhaps you came up with a list that looks like this, using identification by color: black, white, brown, yellow, red. Or maybe you are more politically correct, and your list may have looked like this: African, European, Asian, Native American, Hispanic, Latino, Pacific Islanders. Or perhaps you are really reaching back and came up with Negroid, Caucasoid, and Mongoloid. Despite our constant everyday use of the term race and our reference to various races, the biology of human beings is such that there are no real differences between us. Race is frequently characterized by skin color, hair texture, facial features, and so on. These differences are offered as examples of how we differ as humans. The underlying assumption is that there is a genetic, biological component to these distinctions that define race. This assumption simply is not true. One cannot separate people into racial groups based upon any set of physical characteristics. Attempting to do so is fraught with contradictions. The Bushmen of Southern Africa look as much Asian as they do African. Pacific Islanders have both African and Asian features. The Ainu of Japan look more European than Asian. The Sami of Scandinavia look as much like the Inuit and Yupik as they do like Europeans. The Aborigines of Australia, who often look African, commonly have very straight or wavy hair and are frequently blonde as children. These are a few of the problems one runs into when arguing for the existence of biological racial differences. There are many other examples among them. Dark-skinned people from India, or Egyptians who run the gamut from European looking to African. And how do we identify those from the Middle East? There is, however, hope for those who must differentiate people by race. Earwax. Yes, earwax. It seems that East Asian peoples have dry earwax and the rest of us have moist earwax. So if it is important to you to group people by physical characteristics, there's something you can hang your hat on. James King, author of The Biology of Race, sums it up best. Race is a concept of society that insists there is a genetic significance behind human variations in skin color that transcends outward appearance. However, race has no specific merit outside of sociological classification. There are no significant genetic variations within the human species to justify the division of races. Unfortunately, while the notion of race is illusory, the implication of racism is in America is not. Whenever I ask an audience if they know what the term racism means, almost universally they say they do. I often give a little test to determine if everyone is on the same page regarding the term. I first ask my audience if whites in America can be racist. Of course, everybody agrees they can. I then ask if blacks can be racist, and I get the same response. I then ask them to identify the ways in which white racism adversely impacts the lives of black people as a group, and a list forms. My audience tells me blacks are impacted economically through discriminatory hiring practices. Having little or no access to capital, blacks are seen as lacking business acumen. They are impacted by limited access to health care. They are impacted by overrepresentation in the criminal justice system and underrepresentation in the university system. They are impacted by redlining and other discriminatory practices barring them from finding houses in the areas of their choice. The list goes on. I then ask them to identify how black racism adversely impacts the lives of white people as a group, and there is silence. There is silence because while black people may have prejudices and at times even feel hatred toward white people, perhaps even inspiring fear in many, the reality is that black people lack the power to affect the lives of white people as a group in the same way. Black people's feelings toward white people do not preclude a white person's ability to get along, receive fair treatment by the justice system, acquire education, and so on. This then is racism. The belief that people differ along biological and genetic lines and that one's own group is superior to another group. These beliefs are coupled with and compounded by the power to negatively affect the lives and limit the options of those perceived to be inferior. America's history is inextricably bound to this racist ideology. From the codifying of slavery to the belief in manifest destiny, to the treatment of illegal immigrants and the branding of them as criminals, rapists, or potential terrorists, many of America's actions come to conflict with this creed that all men are created equal. America perceives itself to be the melting pot, the land of opportunity. The words engraved in bronze inside of the Statue of Liberty: "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the refuge of your teeming shore. Send these the homeless, tempest tossed to me," might lead one to believe that all have been welcomed to the shores of America as people with equal rights, privileges, and, most important, prospects for success. To be sure, by and large, many immigrants have found this to be true. Western and Northern Europeans in the 19th century, Eastern and Southern Europeans early in the 20th century experienced their hardships, and within a few decades were enjoying their version of the American dream. America has been and continues to be promoted as a nation that prides itself on equal opportunity as well as its rich multiculturalism. However, history tells a divergent story where Africans are concerned. With the endorsement of slavery as a legal, acceptable, and justifiable institution, the founding fathers committed America's original sin, a sin that continues to plague America. Allowing slavery to persist at America's inception caused those who signed off on the sentiment so eloquently represented in our Declaration of Independence to perjure themselves in this space and doom the nation to a future of lies, pain, and struggle. Get back, baby. Move, baby. Since that time, Black America has labored to recover from the dehumanization of bondage, the effects of peonage, the outrage of the Black Code, the affront of convict leasing, the indignities of Jim Crow, and the ravages of poverty. During the same time, white America has struggled to come to grips with its legacy of chattel slavery and other crimes it committed in the name of morality, progress, and supremacy. The behavior associated with maintaining and justifying slavery, as well as the consequent assault on the generations of African Americans that followed, has resulted in injury, as yet unmeasured to the American psyche. Americans' resistance to accepting responsibility for slavery and repairing the damage continues to prevent the nation from taking its place as the world's moral leader. So we need to notice race as it relates to differential treatment, because the relationship between blacks and whites continues to be among the most challenging issues facing the country today. The problems engendered by race are seemingly intractable. The distrust many black people have for whites is often palpable. The indifference of most whites to black experiences is contemptible. These disparities with regard to health, wealth, and education are vast and expanding. All of these things make it more difficult to live as a black person in America than as a white person. We need to notice, because the overarching problem of this millennium continues to be the problem of the color line. Well over 100 years after emancipation and many decades after Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, 1954, segregation remains the norm rather than the exception. Issues of race and diversity are so critical because they remain at the root of the most pervasive problems facing this nation. We also need to notice, because so little understanding exists between black and white America. We also need to notice, because so little understanding exists between black and white America. There it is. On the face of it, we are at the best civil with each other. But all too often, this civility masks unresolved resentments and hatreds. African Americans are repeatedly asked to reveal proof of their realities of racism to skeptical white people. They reluctantly explain the countless incidents of discrimination and even assaults directed at them and those they love. Some cite the election of President Barack Obama as evidence that racism has ended. More often than not, the response of the questioner is denial and disbelief, while the black person having reopened wounds is left frustrated and re-injured. To me, Noticing difference is most important because it is the first step in arresting the national hemorrhaging of African Americans. It is through such awareness that we can take the first steps toward healing the wounds passed on to the present generation through centuries of ignorance and neglect at the hands of the governing and governed alike. And this is not only between black and white America. We need to notice that the overwhelming majority of the world are people of color. If humanity is to evolve, we need to notice the differences among people, understand them, celebrate them, learn how to integrate these differences, and become a true world community. And I'm going to leave it at that right there. Tomorrow, I'll be on the emergence of African American culture. That's still in chapter 1. Another passage. We got a good little bit to go for chapter 1. So I'll leave that with y'all. That little bit of therapy that I can lend. It'll work for me or it'll work for y'all. I don't do it for me. I do it for y'all. It's Coco, baby. Coblow'S.